when a lonely billionaire watches a humble waitress hug his daughter like her own mother. He realizes money can't buy what his little girl truly needs, and what he does next shocks everyone. The small diner smelled of coffee, pancakes, and fresh toast that morning. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and the waitresses called you hun without even thinking about it. The bell above the door jingled, and a man walked in holding the tiny hand of a little girl. He looked ordinary enough: plain gray sweater, dark jeans. Nothing fancy, but there was something about him. Something in the way he carried himself, calm and quiet, like a man used to people listening when he spoke. His name was Richard Hale. No one in the diner knew that he was one of the richest men in the city. He liked it that way. The little girl beside him, Lily, was 6 years old. Her hair was tied in 2 messy pigtails, and her big brown eyes were full of questions. She was holding a small stuffed bunny by the ear, the fur almost worn off. Richard looked tired, not in a physical way, but in a way that came from the heart. Since his wife passed away 2 years ago, he had tried everything to make Lily smile again: new toys, fancy trips, private tutors, but nothing really worked. She smiled politely when she had to, but the light in her eyes was gone. That morning, he had decided to take her out for breakfast somewhere normal, somewhere simple. He didn't want butlers or private chefs. He wanted her to feel like a regular kid. They slid into a booth by the window. The sun came through the glass, hitting the table in warm light. A young waitress walked up, wiping her hands on her apron. Her name tag said Emma. She had brown hair pulled into a loose bun, freckles across her nose, and a smile that seemed to make the whole room softer. "What can I get for you too?" she asked cheerfully. Lily didn't answer. She was looking down at her bunny, twisting its ear. Richard glanced at the menu, but didn't really read it. "We'll just have some pancakes and orange juice," he said quietly. Emma nodded, but instead of walking away right away, she leaned a little closer to Lily. "That's a cute bunny you've got there," she said kindly. "Does it have a name?" Lily didn't look up at first. Then, in a small voice, she whispered, "Her name is Rosie." Emma smiled. "Rosie, huh? I like that. You know, I used to have a bear named Toby when I was little. He was my best friend." I got a tiny giggle from Lily, quick and shy. Richard looked up, surprised. It was the first real laugh he'd heard from her in days. Emma smiled again and went to place their order, humming softly to herself. Richard watched her go. There was nothing fancy about her. Her uniform was slightly wrinkled, and her shoes looked like they'd seen better days. But there was a warmth in her that filled the space around her. She wasn't pretending to be nice. She just was. He noticed how she greeted every customer like she'd known them forever, how she remembered what they liked to drink. When she brought the pancakes, Lily's eyes widened. There was a tiny, smiley face made out of strawberries and whipped cream on top. "I thought your pancakes could use some company," Emma said, setting the plate down gently. Lily looked up and grinned. "Thank you," she said, her voice finally full of life. Richard felt something strange stir inside him. For months, he'd been searching for ways to make his daughter happy. And now, here was this waitress, this stranger, doing it effortlessly. He didn't know whether to feel grateful or ashamed. Maybe he'd been trying too hard in all the wrong ways. As they ate, Emma came by every few minutes to check on them. She talked to Lily about her drawings, asked her about school, and even showed her how to make a little paper heart out of the corner of the order pad. When she handed it to Lily, the girl held it like it was a treasure. "That's for brave girls," Emma said softly. "Whenever you feel sad, just hold it tight and remember that you're loved, okay?" Richard froze for a moment. That simple sentence hit him harder than he expected. Emma didn't know anything about their life, about how Lily cried at night asking for her mom, about how helpless he felt every time he couldn't answer her questions. Yet somehow, this woman had said exactly what his daughter needed to hear. Lily nodded seriously, clutching the paper heart. "Okay," she whispered. When Emma walked away, Richard's eyes followed her. He wasn't used to noticing people like this. He lived in a world of meetings, numbers, and decisions. But now he found himself watching how she moved, how she smiled at everyone, even when she looked tired. There was a gentleness there he hadn't seen in anyone since his wife. When they finished eating, Richard reached for his wallet. Emma came back with the check, but before he could leave the money, Lily tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, "can we come here again?" He looked down at her, a little stunned. Usually, she never asked to go anywhere. "You like it here?" he asked. She nodded quickly. "Emma's nice. I like her." Richard smiled for the first time that morning. "Then we'll come back," he said. As they walked out, Emma waved goodbye. "Bye, Rosie," she called with a grin. Lily giggled and waved her bunny's paw in reply. Outside, the air was cold, and Richard pulled his coat around his daughter. They walked slowly to his car, and for once, it didn't feel like just another day he had to get through. There was something about that diner, something about that waitress, that made him feel ... different. On the drive home, Lily hummed softly to herself in the back seat, holding the little paper heart. Richard kept glancing at her through the rearview mirror. It amazed him how such a small act from a stranger could light up his daughter's whole world. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Richard sat alone in his big, empty living room. The walls were lined with expensive art, but everything felt hollow. His late wife's photo sat on the piano, and for the first time in a long while, he spoke to it. "She smiled today," he said quietly. "You'd have liked the woman who made that happen." He thought about going back to the diner, maybe to thank Emma, but something stopped him. He didn't want to turn it into a gesture or a transaction. He just wanted to hold on to the feeling for a while, the warmth, the simplicity, the reminder that happiness didn't always come from wealth or power. Sometimes it came from a smile, a folded paper heart, and a kind voice that made a little girl feel seen again. As he turned off the lights and headed upstairs, he found himself planning his next morning. He didn't know why exactly, but he wanted to take Lily back to that diner, not because of the food, but because, for the first time in 2 years, it felt like they had found a small piece of home again. Days turned into weeks, and the small diner slowly became Richard and Lily's favorite place to visit. Every Saturday morning, they sat in the same booth by the window, the one that caught the warm sunlight and gave a clear view of the street outside. It became their little corner of peace in a world that often felt too heavy for both of them. Lily now walked in with excitement, her hand swinging in her father's, her eyes searching the diner for the familiar face she wanted to see the most. Emma would always spot them before they'd even sat down. "My favorite customer and her bunny," she'd say with a grin, walking over with her notepad. Lily would giggle, waving Rosie the stuffed bunny, and Emma would act like she was greeting an old friend. For Richard, those mornings became something he quietly looked forward to. He never told anyone at work about it, never mentioned it in his meetings or social events. To his business partners, he was still Richard Hale, the sharp, serious billionaire who closed deals without hesitation. But in that little diner, he was just a dad trying to make his daughter smile again. Emma had no idea who he really was. To her, he was just a kind man with gentle eyes and a sad sort of quiet about him. He always paid in cash and dressed simply. He didn't talk much about himself, but she noticed the way he always watched Lily, like she was his whole world. Emma liked that. It reminded her of her own father before he passed away. The same look of care and worry mixed together. Lily adored Emma. She told her about her favorite cartoons, the songs she liked, and the silly things her bunny said. Emma always listened. Even when the diner was busy, she would kneel beside the booth and let Lily tell her stories while pretending to take serious notes on her order pad. Sometimes she'd even draw a little doodle, a cat, a flower, or a smiling sun, and slide it across the table just to make Lily laugh. One afternoon, Lily seemed quieter than usual. She kept stirring her juice with her straw and looking down. Emma noticed immediately. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked gently. Lily's little voice was soft. "Some kids at school said I don't have a mommy. They said I'm weird." Emma froze for a second, her heart tightening. She looked at Richard, who was staring down at his coffee, not knowing what to say. He'd had this conversation before, but no matter how he tried to comfort Lily, it never came out right. Emma sat down beside Lily. "Hey," she said softly, "do you know what I think?" Lily shook her head. I think kids don't always understand things they haven't been through. But you, Lily, you're one of the strongest little girls I've ever met. And that's because you've got so much love around you from your dad, from me, from everyone who cares about you. You're not weird, sweetie. You're special." Lily blinked up at her with watery eyes. Then she reached out and hugged Emma tightly. The hug was sudden and full of innocent love. Emma froze for a moment, surprised, then wrapped her arms around her. When Richard looked up and saw them, his heart almost stopped. Lily's head rested on Emma's shoulder, and for the first time in months, his daughter looked peaceful, not just smiling, but truly safe. He didn't say a word. He just watched. Something deep inside him stirred, a warmth that he hadn't felt in a long time. After that day, their visits to the diner felt different. Lily talked more, laughed louder, and even started drawing pictures for Emma. She'd bring little sketches on folded paper, a sun, a flower, or 3 stick figures holding hands, and Emma would tape them on the wall behind the counter with a proud smile. "My art gallery," she called it. Richard noticed everything. The way Emma talked to everyone with kindness. How she worked long hours without complaining. How she smiled even when she looked tired. Sometimes he wanted to ask her how she managed to stay so cheerful. But he didn't. He didn't want to cross a line or make her uncomfortable. Still, something about her presence lingered in his mind long after they left the diner each time. One rainy evening, Richard found himself sitting in his car outside the diner. It was closed, the lights inside dim, and the help wanted sign hung crookedly in the window. He wasn't sure why he had driven there. He had just dropped Lily off at his sister's house for the night and somehow ended up parked in front of the place that had quietly become the center of their little world. He sat there, watching the raindrops slide down the windshield. Thinking about Emma, he thought about how she'd talked to Lily. Patient, warm, never forced. She didn't know anything about his wealth or who he was, and maybe that was the best part. Everything about her was real. She didn't care about status or money. She cared about people. He thought about his wife, about the way she used to laugh easily, about how she made strangers feel like friends. Emma reminded him of her in small, unexplainable ways. But it wasn't just that. Emma had her own light, the kind that came from someone who had learned to keep smiling even when life wasn't easy. The next morning, he went back to the diner with Lily. It was bright again. The rain gone, and the smell of fresh pancakes filled the air. Emma greeted them with her usual smile. Everything felt normal, almost too normal after what he'd felt last night, when the bill came. Richard took out his wallet and tried to leave a large tip, a quiet way to thank her. But Emma noticed and shook her head. "That's too much," she said softly, pushing the money back toward him. "It's just a thank you," Richard said. "You already thanked me," she replied with a kind smile. "You don't pay people to care." Her words hit him straight in the chest. He wanted to argue, to explain that it wasn't about money, but something in her tone made him stop. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw that she meant it. She wasn't being polite. She truly believed that kindness shouldn't be bought. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about what she said. In his world, everything had a price. People pretended to care because they wanted something, a deal, a job, an opportunity. But Emma's kindness was free, real, and that made it priceless. He sat in his office later, staring at his reflection in the dark window, and wondered how someone with so little could give so much. She had something he had lost a long time ago. Genuine connection. Warmth without motive, love without expectation. Meanwhile, Emma went home to her small apartment. She took off her apron, counted her tips, and smiled faintly. It wasn't much, but it was enough to cover part of her rent. She didn't know the man she served pancakes to was worth billions. She only knew he was a good father, trying his best. At that same moment, Richard was sitting alone in his mansion, thinking about how his daughter had found joy, not in all the luxury around her, but in a small diner with a kind-hearted waitress who didn't even know his last name, and though he didn't realize it yet, that quiet bond between them, simple, honest, and pure, was about to change all of their lives forever. The sky was gray that afternoon, the kind of dull color that made everything look tired. Rain had been falling since morning, turning the streets shiny and cold. Inside the diner, the warm yellow lights glowed softly, and the sound of the rain against the windows mixed with the quiet hum of conversation. Emma was wiping down tables, her hair tied back, her sleeves rolled up. The day had been slow, and most customers were gone. Except for one small girl sitting in the corner booth, Lily. Lily's little pink raincoat was hanging on the chair beside her, dripping from the storm outside. She was coloring quietly with a few crayons Emma had given her. Richard was supposed to pick her up an hour ago, but he still hadn't come. Emma looked at the clock for the 5th time in 10 minutes. She didn't want to worry Lily, but she could see the child glancing at the door now and then, her smile fading. "Hey," Emma said softly, walking over. "You okay, sweetheart?" Lily nodded slowly. "Daddy's late." Emma smiled gently and slid into the booth across from her. "He probably got caught in the rain. It's really bad out there." Lily rested her chin on her hand. "He always says he'll come soon, but he works a lot." Emma's heart ached a little at that. She could tell Richard was a good father. She'd seen how he looked at Lily, but she also knew what work could do to people. How it could steal moments you never got back. "Tell you what," Emma said, trying to cheer her up. "How about some hot chocolate while we wait?" Lily's eyes brightened immediately. "With marshmallows?" "Of course," Emma smiled. "What's hot chocolate without marshmallows?" A few minutes later, Lily was sipping the warm drink, a tiny smile returning to her face. Emma sat with her, telling stories about silly customers she'd met or the time she accidentally mixed up sugar and salt in a recipe. Lily giggled, and soon she was talking about her bunny, her school, and how she liked drawing suns even on rainy days. As they talked, the rain kept coming down harder. Emma glanced at the clock again. 2 hours late now. She was starting to get worried. Maybe his car broke down? Maybe there was an accident. She didn't know his number, and she didn't even know where he worked. All she knew was that he always came, no matter what. Just when she was about to call it a night and take Lily home with her, the door burst open. Richard stepped in, soaking wet from head to toe, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked exhausted and panicked. "Lily," he called out. The little girl jumped off the seat and ran straight into his arms. He picked her up tightly, his face full of relief. "I'm so sorry, baby." There was an accident on the highway. Traffic was backed up for miles. "I tried to call, but my phone died." Lily hugged him tightly. "It's okay, Daddy. I was with Emma." Richard looked up at Emma, and his eyes softened. She stood there with a towel in her hand, smiling kindly. "She was wonderful," Emma said quietly. "You've got a brave little girl," he nodded, trying to catch his breath. "Thank you for staying with her." Emma shrugged lightly. "I couldn't just leave her alone." That's when Richard noticed Lily had fallen asleep in Emma's arms. She was resting peacefully, her head on Emma's shoulder, small hand still clutching the paper heart Emma had given her weeks ago. The sight hit him harder than he expected. There was something so gentle about the moment. The warmth of Emma's arms around his daughter, the trust in Lily's sleeping face. He wanted to say something, but no words came. He just stood there, frozen, his chest tight with emotion. Emma looked down at the child and whispered, "She's out cold. Poor thing must be tired." "I'll take her," Richard said quietly, reaching out carefully. His hands brushed against Emma's for just a second, and he felt something warm, something real. After settling Lily into the car, he came back into the diner to thank her properly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Please," he said, placing it on the counter. "This is just for staying late, for everything you've done." Emma looked at it and frowned. "What's this?" "Just a small thank you," he said softly. "You didn't have to stay, but you did." She pushed it back toward him. "I can't take that. It's nothing big," he tried to insist. Emma shook her head. "You don't pay people to care, Richard." Her voice was calm but firm. "I didn't stay for money. I stayed because I couldn't let a little girl sit here scared and alone." He didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to people refusing him. In his world, gratitude was often measured in money. But Emma's words stuck in his mind like a song he couldn't forget. When he finally drove home that night, Lily was still sleeping in the back seat, her bunny and paper heart clutched to her chest. Richard kept glancing at her through the rearview mirror, his mind full of thoughts. He couldn't stop hearing Emma's voice. You don't pay people to care at home. He carried Lily to her room, tucked her in, and sat by her bedside for a while. She looked peaceful, her breathing soft. He brushed a strand of hair from her face and whispered, You really like her, don't you? Lily murmured sleepily, Emma's nice. She makes me feel happy. Richard smiled faintly. Yeah, he whispered, she does that. Downstairs, the big house felt even emptier than usual. The silence pressed in on him. He poured himself a glass of water and stared at the dark windows. The reflection of the rain outside looked like moving shadows. For the first time, he began to see how lonely his world had become. A mansion full of things but missing the sound of laughter. Missing the warmth of someone who cared just because they wanted to. He thought about Emma again. How she smiled even when she was tired. How she'd made Lily laugh with nothing more than crayons and paper. He wondered how someone with so little could give so much happiness. Meanwhile, Emma was walking home in the rain with her umbrella. Her shoes were soaked, and her shift had gone hours past closing, but she didn't mind. Thinking of Lily made her smile. She didn't know why that little girl had touched her heart so deeply. Maybe it was because she reminded her of her younger self, innocent, hopeful, just wanting someone to listen. When she reached her small apartment, she hung up her wet coat and checked her phone. There were 3 messages from her landlord reminding her about the rent. She sighed, made herself a cup of tea, and sat on her old couch. Life was hard, but tonight she didn't feel so tired. She thought about Lily's hug and how pure it had felt. That was enough to make her forget her own worries for a while. Across the city, Richard sat in his study, the lights dim. He picked up a picture of his late wife and whispered, You'd like her? She's kind, just like you were. He didn't know it yet, but something had changed inside him that night. Emma's small act of kindness had opened a door he didn't realize was still there, a door to warmth, to healing, to a kind of love that money could never buy. And as the rain finally stopped, both of them, a billionaire father and a humble waitress, went to sleep thinking about the same little girl who had unknowingly brought their worlds together. The sun was shining brightly on the morning of Lily's school Mother's Day tea. The playground was filled with colorful balloons and little tables decorated with flowers, paper doilies, and tiny cups of juice. Every classroom had set up its own corner for the celebration, and excited chatter filled the hallways. Lily held her father's hand tightly as they walked into the classroom. She looked around nervously, her big brown eyes scanning the room. She noticed all the other kids hugging their moms, showing them little handmade gifts, and whispering secrets. Her small voice trembled as she whispered to Richard, Daddy, can Emma come with me instead of Mom? Richard froze. He had not expected that. He looked down at her, trying to smile, trying to act calm, though his mind raced. He hadn't thought about this moment, about facing a school event meant to celebrate mothers, with Lily's mother gone. The thought of telling her no made his chest ache. But then he remembered the way Emma had hugged Lily when she was sad, the way she made her laugh and feel safe. Could Emma really be the one to step in today? He knelt beside Lily and said softly, Do you really want her to come? Lily nodded eagerly. Please, Daddy. She makes me happy. Richard took a deep breath. All right, he said quietly. If you want her there, we'll ask her. The problem was simple in theory, but complicated in reality. How would Emma react? She was a waitress, not used to school events full of well-dressed parents and teachers. She didn't even know half the kids' names. And then there was the public element. Richard was not just any father. The man who walked into the classroom with Lily was one of the wealthiest men in the city. Someone recognized by a few curious eyes and a few cameras outside the school. He worried about the attention it might bring, but he pushed those thoughts aside. Today was about Lily, not him. He called Emma on her phone. Hey, he said when she answered, his voice soft but steady. Would you come to Lily's Mother's Day tea today? She really wants you there. There was a pause on the other end. Me, at a school event, Emma said cautiously, almost laughing nervously. Yes, Richard said. I know it's unusual, but she really wants you there. Emma bit her lip. Okay. I'll be there, she said finally. A few hours later, Emma arrived at the school. She had chosen a simple dress. Nothing fancy, no makeup, just herself. Her hair was pinned back neatly, but her hands were a little shaky as she held the door open. She didn't know what to expect, but the moment she stepped in, all the children's faces lit up. Lily ran straight into her arms, hugging her tightly. You came, Lily whispered, her voice full of excitement. I told you I'd come, Emma said, smiling. The other parents were watching, curious. Some whispered to each other, noticing the simple, kind woman standing in the classroom with the billionaire's daughter. A few older kids whispered too, noticing her plain outfit compared to the polished dresses of the other mothers. Emma felt self-conscious for a moment, but then she saw Lily's face and remembered why she was there. The tea began. Children sang songs, recited little poems, and handed out crafts. When it was Lily's turn, she held Emma's hand tightly, walking to the front of the room. She introduced Emma in her small but confident voice. This is my friend Emma, she said. She makes me happy and helps me when I'm sad. She's very kind. There was silence in the room. Emma felt every eye on her, felt the unspoken judgment in the polished faces of other parents. She looked down at Lily, who was smiling shyly but proudly. Emma realized something important. This wasn't about what anyone else thought. This was about being there for Lily. She smiled warmly and whispered, I'm so happy to be here, Lily. During the performance, Emma held Lily's hand, sang along quietly, and wiped a small tear from her cheek when Lily's little voice trembled. Richard watched from the back, trying to remain calm, but he couldn't stop the pride swelling in his chest. Emma was doing more than just helping his daughter. She was giving her courage, comfort, and love in a place where Lily might have felt nervous and alone. After the tea, the event came to a close. Children gave Emma handmade cards and drawings, which she accepted graciously. Lily's friends whispered excitedly, pointing at Emma and asking questions. Who is she? Why isn't she your mom? Emma answered politely, explaining that she was Lily's friend and someone very special to her. Lily held her hand tightly, proud to have her in the spotlight. But outside the school, someone had noticed. A tabloid photographer had been waiting for a glimpse of Richard Hale, hoping for a story. The camera clicked rapidly as he walked hand in hand with Lily, Emma, by their side. By the next morning, the photos were all over the internet. Headlines screamed, Mystery woman seen with billionaire and his daughter, and who is the woman Richard Hale trusts? Emma panicked when she saw the news. Her simple life felt suddenly exposed. She didn't want attention, didn't want people talking about her. She had just been trying to be a good friend to a little girl, okay? And now it felt like the whole city knew about her. Richard noticed her tension. He reached out and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. It's okay, he said. You don't have to hide. You did something wonderful today, and that's all that matters. Emma looked at him, unsure. But everyone will see. And I'm not ready for that. Richard smiled quietly. Emma, look at Lily. He pointed to his daughter, who was smiling up at them. She had the best day of her life because you were there. That's worth more than any opinion out there. Emma's eyes softened. She looked down at Lily, who reached up and hugged her tightly. You're the best, Emma, Lily whispered. Richard realized then that the unthinkable choice he had made, asking Emma to step in for Lily's mother, had been the right one. He had worried about appearances, about how the world would see them, about money and status. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the joy and love he had just witnessed, the courage and comfort Emma had given his daughter, and the bond they were forming. The day ended with Richard walking hand in hand with Lily back to the car, Emma beside them. The crowd of parents and children slowly dispersed, and the photographer's camera finally stopped clicking. But for Richard and Emma, it wasn't about the cameras or the news. It was about Lily and the happiness that was so clear in her eyes that night. Richard sat alone in his study, thinking about how different life had become in such a short time. He had spent years trying to protect Lily from sadness, trying to fill the void left by her mother. He had bought her every toy, every experience, every opportunity. But nothing had worked until Emma. She didn't need wealth or influence. She didn't need a title or recognition. She simply had a heart that cared, and that had changed everything. Meanwhile, Emma returned home exhausted but smiling. The event had been overwhelming, but seeing Lily so happy, feeling the trust in that little girl's eyes, made everything worth it. She didn't care about the gossip or attention. She had done something real, something that mattered. Richard knew the next steps would not be easy. The attention from the photos could bring complications. People would ask questions, speculate, and judge. But he didn't care. What mattered was protecting the bond between Lily and Emma, and making sure that small, simple moments of love and kindness could continue. And as Lily fell asleep that night, clutching a little drawing she had made for Emma, Richard made a quiet promise to himself. He would do everything in his power to make sure that the happiness and trust Emma had given his daughter would never fade. That day, something unthinkable had happened. He had let someone else into their lives. Someone who wasn't family by blood, but had become family by heart. And in doing so, he realized that love could come in the most unexpected places. And sometimes, the bravest thing a person could do was open their heart. The diner was quiet that morning, but it had a feeling of anticipation, like the air itself was holding its breath. Richard Hale arrived early with Lily, her little hand gripping as tightly as usual. But this time it wasn't just another breakfast visit. Richard had made a decision that would change everything. He parked his car outside and looked at the small, familiar building. It smelled of coffee, pancakes, and the soft warmth that made Lily light up every time they came. He remembered all the weeks they had spent here, the laughter, the little paper hearts, and how Emma had unknowingly become the most important person in Lily's life after him. Emma arrived shortly after, dressed in her simple work clothes, but something was different today. She didn't know yet what Richard had planned, but she sensed that something was about to happen. Lily ran toward her with a smile that could melt the hardest heart. "Emma, you're here," she said, hugging her tightly. Richard watched them, a small smile on his face. He had spent weeks thinking about how to show his gratitude. Money could never repay Emma for what she had given Lily: happiness, comfort, and love. So he decided to do something radical. Something that would secure the diner for her and the staff who had become like family to his daughter. He wanted to make sure this place, this little haven of warmth, would never have to close its doors or struggle again. "Emma," he said quietly, after Lily had run to the play area, "I want to talk to you for a moment." Emma followed him behind the counter, her hands clasped nervously. Richard took a deep breath. "I want to buy this diner," he said. Emma blinked, unable to speak for a moment. You want to buy it?" "Yes," Richard said. "Not because I want to own it, but because I want it to be yours. You've done more for my daughter than anyone else ever could, and I don't want this place or the people who work here to ever struggle again." Emma shook her head. "I can't. I don't deserve this. I'm just a waitress. I don't know anything about running a business like this." Richard smiled gently. "You don't have to run it alone. I'll make sure it stays exactly how it is, but I want you to be here. You've made this place special for Lily, and for everyone who comes here. I just want you to have the security and freedom you deserve." Emma's eyes filled with tears. She hadn't expected this, not in a million years. She had just been doing her job, helping a little girl she cared about. And now, the man who had once seemed so distant and untouchable was offering her a gift that could change her life forever. Meanwhile, Lily had been watching from the play area. Her little heart swelled when she realized what was happening. She ran over to Emma and jumped into her arms. "See, I told you. He wants you to stay forever." Emma laughed through her tears and hugged Lily back. "I can't believe this," she whispered. Richard watched them, feeling a peace he hadn't known in years. His house, his cars, his wealth, none of it compared to this. He had spent so long trying to make up for his wife's absence, trying to fill the void in Lily's life with things, trips and gifts, but nothing worked until Emma arrived. She had given Lily something he could never buy: love without expectation, care without condition. and a sense of happiness that came from being truly seen. The weeks that followed were full of changes, but they were gentle and positive. Richard made sure the diner was renovated just enough to be safe and comfortable, but he kept its cozy charm intact. The smell of fresh coffee, the laughter of regular customers, and the little doodles on the walls stayed exactly the same. Emma became more confident in running the place, supported by Richard quietly behind the scenes. Every morning, Lily ran to the diner with the same excitement as before, but now she had a new sense of security. She knew that Emma was there not just for breakfast or snacks, but as someone who would always be a part of her life. Richard often watched them from a corner, smiling quietly as Emma kneaded dough, joked with customers, or listened patiently to Lily's endless stories. One morning, as they sat down with their pancakes, Richard finally spoke to Emma about something he had been holding back. "I need to tell you something," he said softly. "You've helped me more than you know. I've spent years trying to protect my daughter, trying to make her happy, but I never realized I needed help too. You reminded me what love looks like, not the grand gestures, but the small, simple ones." Emma looked at him, surprised. I didn't do anything special," she said quietly. Richard shook his head. "No, you did. Every hug, every smile, every time you made her laugh when she wanted to cry. You gave her something I couldn't, and you gave me something I didn't know I'd lost hope. Peace and the courage to open my heart again." Emma felt her chest tighten. She had never been praised like this before. In her life, people often overlooked her, dismissed her, or didn't notice the little things she did. But here was a man who not only noticed, but appreciated the most sincere, quiet part of her heart. Lily, sitting between them, watched quietly, sensing the importance of the moment, even if she didn't fully understand it. She leaned against Emma and whispered, "You're my heart, Mom, now." Emma's eyes filled with tears. She hugged Lily tightly and whispered back, "And you're my brave little girl." Richard smiled quietly, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded him for years. His life of luxury and control had never brought him this feeling, the warmth of a bond formed out of trust, love, and care. He realized that the unthinkable thing he had done, opening his heart to Emma and giving her the diner, was not about wealth or power. It was about doing the right thing for his daughter, and for the woman who had become a part of their little family. The diner soon became a place of joy and laughter. Regular customers came not just for the food, but for the warmth they felt from Emma, Lily, and even Richard, who sometimes helped out quietly in the mornings. Lily continued to draw little pictures, and Emma proudly added them to the wall. The paper hearts, the small doodles, and the laughter of a little girl had transformed the space into something more than a diner. It was a home filled with love. Richard and Emma developed a quiet understanding and friendship. He never flaunted his wealth or tried to overshadow her, and she never let herself be intimidated by him. Together, they created a balance, his experience and resources. Her kindness and heart, and Lily's innocent joy tying it all together. Months passed. The little trio became inseparable. They shared simple mornings over pancakes, quiet evenings talking about school, and occasional trips that didn't feel like extravagant vacations but just small adventures filled with laughter. Richard finally understood that the richest moments in life weren't bought, they were lived. One morning, as they all sat together, Lily looked at them both with a contented smile. "I love this place," she said softly, glancing around the diner. "And I love you both." Emma and Richard exchanged a glance, their hearts full. Emma reached over and squeezed Lily's hand. "We love you too, kiddo," she said warmly. Richard looked at the two of them and whispered quietly to himself, "We finally found home." In that moment, the billionaire father, the humble waitress, and the little girl who had lost so much found something priceless: love, trust, and a family that was made not by blood, but by heart. The diner, the paper hearts, and the laughter became symbols of a life rebuilt, proving that even in the most unexpected places, happiness could bloom, and even the unthinkable could become the most beautiful reality.